Fake photographs exposed. A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but that doesn't mean those words are the truth. Photography is generally considered an invaluable asset for studying the past, images that show an event as it actually occurred, rather than a romanticized depiction by an artist. In spite of this, some photographs are not always what they seem, and can alter perceptions of historical events. General Grant at City Point. About a half-century after the end of the Civil War, there was a great demand for heroic images from that conflict. In 1902, a photograph was revealed showing Union General Ulysses S. Grant sitting proudly astride a horse with soldiers in the background looking on. Even with a cursory glance, there's something odd about the photograph. The reason being, the photograph was a fake. General Grant at City Point is one of the earliest examples of photo manipulation, decades before Photoshop. Several of the aspects of the scene simply do not stand up to even the most cursory scrutiny. Grant's head is at an odd angle compared to the rest of his body, a position that would be uncomfortable, if not impossible, for him to maintain for any length of time. He only has a single star to denote his rank on his shoulder, though by 1864 he was a 3-star general. The horse Grant is seated on is also incorrect. The animal in the photograph has a sock, or white fur, on its left rear leg. Grant's horse at the time, a famous mount named Cincinnati, lacked such a marking. Lastly, the soldiers in the background are acting suspiciously for troops of the era. No soldier at the time would deliberately remain seated with their backs turned towards their commanding officer in such a disrespectful manner. They, along with the sentry at the right of the photo, seem totally oblivious to such an important figure posing for a photograph, something that is unlikely in the extreme. The image is a composite, or several photographs merged into one. General Grant's head was taken from a photograph of him at Cold Harbor, 1864. And the man on horseback was not Grant, but rather another Union general, Major General Alexander McDowell McCook. The background soldiers were actually Confederate prisoners under guard after the Battle of Fisher's Hill, 1864. The image was probably created around 1902 by Levin Corbin Handy, a photographer and nephew of famed Civil War photographer Matthew Brady. He created the image using some of the scores of negatives he inherited from his uncle, and did so to satisfy demand for heroic images of the Civil War a half-century after its conclusion. This just goes to show that even without modern photo manipulation techniques, there are still those who are willing to alter imagery for their own profit. Stalin's altered photos. Virtually all world leaders have used image alteration to some degree for propaganda purposes, but Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin turned photo manipulation into an art form. Most commonly, he would employ editors of his photographs to cover up the numerous pockmarks on his skin, a legacy of a childhood bout with smallpox. Most prominently, however, was the removal of those who fell out of favor with the regime. In possibly the most famous altered image of the Soviet era, Nikolai Yezhov, head of the NKVD, was removed from a photograph of him walking alongside Stalin as they strolled along the Moscow-Volga Canal. Yezhov would be accused of treason and executed in 1940, and all subsequent images would be purged from Soviet history. Likewise, a 1926 image of Stalin along with 3 other Communist Party leaders was gradually whittled down over the years, until only Stalin remained, the sole leader of the Soviet Union. He would oversee other changes to bolster his reputation or erase political undesirables. A famous 1917 image of Lenin was airbrushed to eliminate Leon Trotsky, who fell out of favor with Stalin after his rise to power. These, and other images, painted Stalin as the all-powerful leader of the Soviet Union who allowed no dissent to his rule. Soviet flag over the Reichstag. Images of Stalin were not the only Soviet alterations of photographs. By the end of April 1945, Soviet troops were pouring into Berlin. By April 30th, the Red Army began its assault against the Reichstag, the main building of the German government. Defended by around 5,000 German soldiers, the battle for the symbolic heart of the Nazi regime was fierce. There are many differing accounts as to what specifically happened, but it is generally believed that after repeated assaults, the building fell into Soviet hands, and several banners were placed to mark the triumph, but all but one were destroyed in subsequent fighting. The surviving banner would be taken down and sent back to Moscow. It was painted by the men who had raised it, cementing their place as the conquerors of the Reichstag. It stated, 9 Shooting Battalion of the 150th Division of the 3rd Shock Army of the 1st Belarusian Front. This is not the banner from the famous photograph, however. 2 days later, Berlin was firmly in Soviet hands, and military correspondent Yevgeny Khalday, along with soldiers of the 8th Guards Army, arrived in the devastated city. In addition to his camera equipment, he also carried a large victory banner, which was actually made from 3 red tablecloths stitched together. He then had several soldiers raise the banner over the Reichstag. It was believed that these soldiers were selected for symbolic reasons, though it was later revealed that Khalday simply used whichever soldiers were standing nearby at the time. Inspired by the famous flag raising over Iwo Jima, the photographs show Red Army soldiers hoisting their banner over the defeated enemy capital, which lies in ruins beneath them. Before publication, however, the image would be altered for propaganda purposes. The most telling alteration would be the removal of a wristwatch from the arm of one of the soldiers. In the unaltered work, a watch could be seen on each arm, which would imply the soldier was a looter. It is possible that the object was a wrist-mounted compass, but it was removed anyway, as any implication of such behavior would be unacceptable. In the background, clouds of smoke were added to give the image a more dramatic feel, and the banner itself was given a more billowing appearance, heightening the drama. Additionally, later versions of the photo were colorized, with the flag changed to a more striking shade of red, helping it stand out. In later years, Khalday would defend the alterations. If asked about the staged nature of the image or the later changes, he would simply say, quote, "It is a good photograph and historically significant. Next question, please." Senator Tidings scandal. Sometimes altered photographs can have wide-ranging political impacts. In 1950, a Democratic Senator, Millard Tidings of Maryland, was expecting an easy victory during his re-election campaign. Shortly before the November election, however, thousands of copies of a tabloid were distributed to Maryland voters by the campaign of his opponent, John Marshall Butler. In the tabloid were several false stories about Tidings, the centerpiece of which was a photograph showing the senator in a conversation with Earl Browder, who was the former leader of the Communist Party of America. At this time, the United States was in the grip of the Red Scare, where it was believed that communists had infiltrated high levels of American society, including education, entertainment, and government. At the same time, the U.S. was engaged in the Korean War, and anti-communist sentiment was running at a fever pitch. As a result, Tidings lost his re-election bid. In the aftermath of the election, Tidings alleged that Butler's campaign had participated in unfair campaign practices, the most egregious being the doctored photograph. In reality, Tidings and Browder had never met one another, never mind had a serious conversation. The photo was a composite of Tidings listening to election results in 1938 and Browder testifying at a Senate hearing in 1950. A bipartisan investigation was conducted, and it was revealed that Butler's campaign had been given assistance by infamous Senator Joseph McCarthy, who held a grudge against Tidings. Earlier that year, a Senate subcommittee chaired by Tidings investigated McCarthy's claims of communist infiltration. The committee concluded that the claims were a fraud and a hoax, dismissing the allegations. For reasons as seemingly petty as revenge, McCarthy backed Butler, using his influence to slander Tidings' reputation. In spite of this, Butler was still allowed to keep his seat in the Senate, as there were no specific senatorial rules at the time preventing such actions. Due to this act of political slander, Tidings would never hold office again. Photographs have been altered since photography's inception. Whether for profit or propaganda, images have been and will continue to be used for the benefit of less than scrupulous individuals.